now like to invite Mark for the second part of this, the good, bad, and the ugly. You're not in a Clint Eastwood film, but it feels like that with carbon. So let me introduce you to Mark. Wow, I mean, you're a strategic advisor to governments, investors, NGOs, corporates. You're the co-founder of Carbon Removals. And is that CUR8?
CUR8, yeah.
CUR8. Mark has 2 best-selling books, An Optimist Tour of the Future, and the award-winning We Do Things Differently, which maps out some existing and proven solutions to our current dilemmas. Gets better. Mark is a former strategic advisor on peace, national security, and climate change to the UK Ministry of Defence. And you also have quite a successful side hustle in comedy writing and songwriting. And so you're now, Mark, going to talk about or use the Platinum Jubilee Pageant as a case study.
Yes, kind of. Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Hello. Hello. That's an interactive moment. Let's do that again. Hi. Hello. Oh. Right. I'm going to talk to you about the whole shit show we're in and how we're going to solve it. I'm going to talk about carbon removal. Okay. So all the science says that. I should start my timer so I don't run. All the science says that even if you do everything right on reducing emissions, we still have to remove about 220 gigatonnes of carbon from the atmosphere by 2050. Otherwise, everything else we're doing at this conference makes no sense. Otherwise, we won't hit 1.5. Okay, so this is this thing where we have to remove the carbon. Okay, now you may be aware of this thing called offsetting. Okay, and where people say, well, that's okay. We can solve that problem for you because you give us some money and you tell us what your emissions are, and we will wash away your climate sins by offsetting this for you. Turns out that most offsetting is complete bullshit. Because you're being sold carbon credits as if they're all the same thing, and actually they're 3 different things. So I'm going to explain what these are. But before I do that, I just need to say there's the moral and environmental imperative that we have to remove the carbon from the atmosphere, otherwise we're all dead. So, which is bad, because it's my favourite planet. It's where all my stuff is. So, but also there's now increasingly a legal and legislative imperative. So the UK, for instance, has a legally binding net zero target for 2050. The UK has to, and I'm also an ambassador for Client Earth, the environmental law charity. We took the government to court just before Christmas saying, your net zero law is really great, but your net zero plan doesn't actually deliver it. So you're in contradiction of your own law, and the High Court upheld our position. And now we have a new Department of Net Zero as a result, which is going to be passing legislation to make sure that all of you reach net zero. What does net zero mean? What is the legal definition of net zero? It means reduce your emissions as much as you possibly can and remove the carbon from the atmosphere from the rest. Not offset, remove. So what's the difference between offsetting and removing? So there are 3 types of carbon credit. The first type is you emit 10 tons of carbon, you come to an offsetting company, and they go, right, give me some money and I will go and do something with it. They do 3 separate things. One is they say, okay, give me some money and I will legally protect an existing carbon sink. So this might be a forest that exists, and I'm going to protect that for you. That's got 10 tons of carbon in it, make sure that doesn't get chopped down. That's an important thing to do. We need to protect our existing carbon sinks. And it's quite cheap to do, but that doesn't take any carbon back, okay? It doesn't take any carbon back. You've put a ton of carbon out. You're saying this ton of carbon that might have gone out in the future will not go out. So your ton of carbon is still there. You've not removed it. You're not net zero. Also, there's quite a lot of scams in this area where people are going like, oh, pay me to protect this forest that I was protecting already. In fact, the Nature Conservancy in the US a few years ago sold hundreds of millions of these credits to people for forests that were on public land that was their actual job to protect in the first place. Okay? But they then sold these credits on to you. And then as an organisation, you go and say, oh, I'm carbon neutral. And actually, it turns out, there's lots of scandals now coming out. You might see one about South Pole recently, one about Vera and Silvera coming out, where people have been promising these things, and they're not delivering what you actually want. The second type of credit is where they say, give me some money, you've emitted 10 tons of carbon, I'm going to take your money, I'm going to invest it in some renewable infrastructure. So I'm going to have a wind farm or some solar panels, which means that 10 tons of carbon that might have gone out in the future will not now go out because we've replaced it with renewable infrastructure. That's good. That's an important thing to do. The whole world needs to decarbonise. Your ton of carbon is still in the atmosphere. You put a ton out, here's a ton that wasn't going to go, that might have gone out, that is now not. So you've still got your ton of carbon out, so you're not net zero. So to get to net zero, you have to pay somebody to remove a ton. Okay, that's the third type of credit. All these things are sold as if they're the same thing, and they're not. Now, we have a sister NGO that is working with the legislators and the NGOs to sort out, and the rule setters and the scientists to sort out this language. And this language is now going to go into the EU legislation. There are these 3 different types. Protecting existing carbon sinks, renewable infrastructure credits, and carbon removals. Currently, only 4% of credits that you will be sold as an offset remove carbon from the atmosphere. And most of those do it by planting trees. I love trees. Trees are great. Unfortunately, they take a long time to draw back your carbon. Most of the carbon is drawn back at the end of its life. Okay? There are also some pretty dodgy people planting some pretty dodgy trees in the wrong place that can burn down because of climate change, which kind of defeats the point. So nothing wrong with planting trees, okay? But they take a long time to draw down their carbon. Okay? If you've got a net zero target of, say, 2040, and you plant a tree now, I'm sorry, you're not going to get your carbon back. Although the person selling it to you might say you have, might say you can claim it, but that's a lie, because the carbon hasn't been drawn back. Okay. So, and for instance, we did an analysis, our NGO did an analysis of a couple of software companies who said, we've got a net zero plan, we're going to remove, can you audit it for us? We looked at it and said, yeah, you said you're going to remove using trees. It's not a bad thing to do. Unfortunately, you do realize you have agreed to plant a forest the size of Spain next year. And they were like, oh, shit. So there are three things you need to understand when you're trying to remove carbon from the atmosphere. How quickly does it come down? No point in planting a tree if your carbon net zero target is 2030, okay? You just don't have time to draw it down, okay? So how quickly does it come down, okay? If it comes down, does it stay down, okay? Trees are quite good, but what if they burn down? Soil carbon, very good, comes down very quickly, but the soil is in constant conversation with the air. If they change farming practices, the carbon go back up, okay? So how does it stay down? And who the hell independently verifies that? Because a lot of the people who are selling offsets are marking their own homework, okay? So this is a complete shit show, okay? Because the planet literally needs us to remove 220 gigatons of carbon, and every single one of you is going to be legally responsible for being net zero, and yet we've got a whole bunch of people out there that do not provide the service that the planet and indeed you need. Which is why I set up CUR8. And that's why what Rosanna did was absolutely amazing, because she actually went, yeah, let's fuck this bullshit, let's actually remove the carbon rather than do some dodgy offset. Okay? So these three things you need to know, okay? How quickly does it come down? How quickly does it come down? If it comes down and stays down, who independently verifies that? There are many, many ways to do carbon removal. Carbon is a very promiscuous element, okay? I like to call it the slut of the periodic table, because it will bond with pretty much everything, which is why Mother Nature makes everything out of it, including us, okay? So making carbon move from one form to another is not difficult. There are loads of ways to remove carbon, and planting trees is one. That's a great way. Right at the other end is this thing called direct air capture. It's a big, exciting sort of sci-fi machines that pull carbon out of the atmosphere using a chemical process. Now, that's very expensive. So why would you do that? Well, I'll tell you why you do that, because it comes down instantly. You say to me, remove a ton of carbon. I phone up the people who are building the machines and say, you want a ton of carbon remove? Can we schedule that for next Tuesday? They press the machine, it comes down. It's really easy to verify. We can literally see the carbon going down a pipe. So it's easy to verify, very easy to independently verify. And they usually mineralize that carbon in rock underneath the plant, which means it's gone for millennia. It's gone forever. The thing is, it's fucking expensive. It's about $1,000 per ton for some people. We do it at about 300 for various commercial reasons that we've managed to work out. So what you need to do is actually blend all of these things together. So there's trees on one end, direct capture there, there's things like biochar, there's enhanced weathering, there's bio-based building materials, there's soil carbon, which we can now do durably, which we didn't think we could do, but that's thanks to a contact that we made via the Edge through you two, who's invested, I've invested in this company that does durable soil carbon. We said, thank you very much. So what we do is put all of that into a portfolio that gives you well, this is in fact the portfolio for the Jubilee Pageant. So we put all these things into a portfolio. Now, why do we do that? There's two reasons that we should really be buying portfolios of carbon. One is because if you decide to just do one thing, to your carbon removal, and something went wrong with that, the company went bust, or a little bit of science came out and said, actually the drawdown rate's not the same. Or particularly with nature-based solutions, the amount of carbon drawdown can change because of what's happening in nature, okay, whether it's rained that season or whatever. So if you put all your eggs in one basket and it goes wrong, suddenly your net zero target may not be met, which is problematic, okay? So by investing in all of them, it's kind of like, if anything goes wrong with them, we can swap things in and out. And indeed, at CUR8, what we do is we guarantee this. So we say, if you buy a ton of carbon of us, if anything goes wrong, we will be able to swap other things in because you haven't got all your eggs in one basket. Actually, we're so cautious that usually there's an upside. In fact, I phoned up a client yesterday and said, actually, I've got you another 30 tons on your portfolio because we've been so cautious. The other thing is that the planet needs us to do all of these. So what we're trying to do at CUR8 is be a market-making mechanism along with our sister engineers. Like, there isn't enough of this stuff on the market right now, and we have to build this operating system for the planet. By doing this, I can take this money and invest in every single provider of carbon removals on the planet and say, I have orders for you this year, next year, the year after, and invest in the new technologies that are coming up. So this is kind of a typical mix that we sell. And this is how it comes down. So some of it's immediately being drawn down. There are ways that you can draw some. Most of it's within 3 years, some of it's in 10 years, and some of it's in 75. This is trees. We do believe trees are important. They're an important part, and you get lots of biodiversity benefits as well, so you have to do some of that. And this is how durable it is. This is legal durability, okay? This is what we can claim legally. Actually, it's much more than this. But on average, you've got a durability of about 500 years. So we're mixing all those things together. And that is essentially what we do. One of the reasons we're so interested in events and the music industry is because we need people with an outsized voice to invest in this market. Another thing I will say is it's expensive to remove your carbon. Okay? We're £200 a tonne. Why is that important? It's important for several reasons. That's actually how much it costs to create a mix like that and then cover our costs to do it. Also, it's pegged to something called the social cost of carbon. So there's a lot of research coming out that says, how much does a tonne of carbon actually cost humanity in terms of the damage it's doing? And that research in various parts of the world seems to be coming to £200, €200, $200. Third, if you're paying $9, $10, $15 for a carbon offset to wash away your carbon sins, what incentive do you have to reduce your emissions? Absolutely fucking none. It should be painful because you're damaging the planet and you should pay for that. And that's how a functioning economy should work, by baking into the cost of business the damage we do to the planet. I keep saying to all of my clients, I do not want your business. To be honest, I don't fucking want to be running a carbon removals company. Okay? I'd rather have a guitar on my neck, playing out with my prog rock band, playing needlessly complex music to old white men who don't want to dance. That is what I want to do with my life. I don't want to be doing this, but I am doing this because if we're going to save the planet, we're going to do it well. Okay? So I keep saying to my clients, pay me less money next year. I don't want the carbon atmosphere. I want you to take the pain of having to do it properly to further reduce your emissions. Because if we don't reduce our emissions, everything else is dead. So carbon removals is a way to increase demand on reducing emissions, a way to build an operating system for the planet which we can actually save ourselves, and a way that all of us, so we're working now, for instance, with the O2 and their caterers, Compass and Levi, to be able to create carbon-removed gigs. I don't want a world where we fight the climate crisis by saying you can't go to a gig and you can't enjoy the pageant and you can't go to your favourite restaurant. What I do want to do is like the cost of removing the carbon is factored into that business model. So we're now making multi-year deals with lots of businesses to say, actually, if we remove our carbon over the cost of all operations, turns out 10p a burger. Whereas I'm not now seeing it as a cost, I'm seeing it as just the cost of entry of doing business properly. And if we don't do this, by the way, nothing we do matters because we're all going to die. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. I'm going to ask Rosanna to join us
Into the chair.
on stage, and I think we're just getting oh, you beat somebody to it. There you go. Thank you. I'm going to, because we're sort of running short of time, I'm going to open it up to the audience. And there's hands going up already. This lady here with just bringing a mic over.
Hi there. I'm Emily from Artichoke Trust. I'm just really interested in the budget and financial side of your carbon removal process. Mm-hmm. And Rosanna, well, to you both, how do you set aside a budget for carbon removals from the outset of a project when presumably you have no idea what those emissions are going to be?
Yeah, so from our perspective, we had a budget for it, and we also had some contingency built in to our whole event budget. And in the end, because we saved on some contingencies, we could remove everything. But we weren't sure at the project. We knew we'd be able to do something, but we were really delighted that we could do more. But it was tricky because, particularly because we were fundraising, we just didn't know whether we were going to get the funds in and whether we would overspend on certain areas. So I think from our perspective, we said, right, we want to make a really good impact in this area, and in the end, we could do more than we planned.
Yeah, I mean, if you're working with people like Greener Future, that, you know, they and Artichoke are indeed doing that, and indeed we are working with Artichoke to remove some of your carbon, is that you can start to say in advance, okay, we've got a rough idea of what our carbon footprint is going to be. And then you can start to bake that into the business model. So, for instance, we're working with some very low-margin businesses. We thought we'd have to work with very high-margin businesses, but like the caterers we're working with, you know, they've worked out actually if we just amortise this. And also, if you take responsibility for your scope 1 and 2, that's your own mess. and just remove that. Your scope 3 is made of everybody else's scope 1 and 2. So what's happening now is we're working on removing people's scope 1 and 2, and then they're saying, go and talk to our suppliers and our customers and whatever, because our scope 3 is their scope 1 and 2. And if everybody takes responsibility for their own scope 1 and 2, so you've got an ecosystem play where everybody is removing the carbon. So there's all sorts of ways of doing it. Also, as we're going towards net zero, so we're signing these multi-year deals now where somebody says, I have a net zero target 2030, can't afford to do all my removals at the moment because I hadn't factored that in, but I will agree to do 10% this year, 20% the year after, 30% the year after, as I'm reducing my emissions, because the cost of removals acts as a, and we get to this residual at the end and say, by then we'll be removing 100% of our emissions. So they start to sort of slowly program. And there's all sorts of other ways of slicing and dicing it. The market is completely new. So we're finding lots of different and inventive ways to work with people. But, with Artichoke, for instance, I believe that Claire is working on we're looking at your whole operations going forward into the future. It's probably going to be something like this. You probably can't afford to remove all of that now, but it's better to remove a small proportion of your emissions than dodgily offset all of them, because otherwise you're going to soon end up in court if you do that badly.
Thank you. Any next question?
Hi there, Teresa Moore, Green Festival. Just Green Future.
Yes. I got it right. Did you see? I did.
Green
on brand.
Yeah. I'll get it. Just a quick question. I was interested to hear that you'd taken the government to court because they weren't meeting, and you talked about independent verification. That's absolutely right. But as we've seen with the water companies, where there's legislation in place, what about enforceability?
Yeah.
Has that come into the picture?
So this is all evolving at the moment. I mean, at the end of the day, you can't argue with the laws of physics. There is a reason there's a new net zero department, and it's also it's the Department of Net Zero and Energy Security, which is very interesting. So basically, right now, what's happening is your McKinsey's, your KPMG's, your Ernst & Young's are all tooling up net zero compliance auditing teams in advance of it. So everybody knows it's coming. There's a new Labour legislation coming in, and the Labour front bench that we've been talking to are very keen on this kind of idea as well. And the enforcement will be one thing, and obviously that can be dodgy as it is with financial regulation, but also there might be some very interesting carrots as well. So it might be that, because right now you're legally required to publish a net zero plan if you're above a certain size, and you're legally required to publish your emissions. Nobody independently audits that at the moment. That's going to start coming. But it might well be the case that 5 or 10 years from now, if you are on your net zero journey, you are being audited, and you're compliant, and you're doing a good job, you will be rewarded with lower corporation tax. So there'll be lots of incentives. And the good thing about that encourages organisations to innovate in a low carbon world. And so it's popular with the right because it reduces taxes, and it's popular with the left because it's a progressive tax that encourages innovation in a green way. So I think, the thing about lots of environmental law is loads of good stuff about, and nobody enforces it, which is why at Client Earth, that's kind of what we do. And we almost always win. Not because, they are brilliant lawyers and whatever, but because the law is quite clear. You shouldn't do this, but nobody's been enforcing it. Well, we are, thank you, because Coldplay or Brian Eno wrote us a check to take you to court. So there is some enforcement. So the other thing I would say is, if you're thinking about your wider impact and you want to think, I want to do good things for the planet, yes, do carbon removals, but also, with your if you've got any philanthropic budget, give it to Client Earth. Probably the best thing you can do right now, because you change the legal framework and the legal pressure also makes it easier for investors to invest in green companies, etc., etc., etc.
Any other? Oh, this side. While we just go across the room, what struck me was we know about greenwashing with fashion, but I didn't realise there's kind of greenwashing with carbon, and that people are pretending to plant forests or reselling forests.
Yeah, some of it, I can't remember the quote, was never attribute to malice what can be attributed to incompetence. So I think there's quite a lot of people who started off doing the right thing. There's nothing wrong with planting trees, and there's nothing wrong with doing those other offsets. Just know what you're buying.
Yeah.
And there are some really good players, and we're going to partner with some players who do those other kind of offsets. Okay, but some of them, for instance, South Pole, these are billion-dollar companies sold these offsets saying, oh, we're protecting a forest. And in their methodology, there was a deforestation rate of something like 30% a year. Well, actually, the local deforestation rate from local people going and chopping down was actually about 3%. So they were selling 10 times the credit that they could actually verify. And lots of other companies, big companies like Waldron, were claiming this product is carbon neutral. So it's a whole shit show. And, or was it that Upton Sinclair said, it's very hard to get somebody to understand something when their salary depends upon them not understanding it. And this is why you have to be very careful about who's selling you this stuff. So, for instance, at CUR8, we have decided we are not doing footprinting. Absolutely. We will partner with great footprinting organisations like Agree in the Future, because if we do your footprint, it is in our exact interest to overstate your footprint so we can sell you more removals, isn't it? Lots of these offsetting companies are also doing carbon footprinting. Dodgy.
It's a whole scam. Lady over there.
Hi, I'm Jane Alionite from Edinburgh Napier University. I agree with a lot of what you said, and I think, yeah,
Did you hear the
definitely.
butt? Can you hear the butt? It's just...
I think you can handle the butt. Go on, sorry.
Yeah, I was just saying I agree with what you say, but I think in terms of the way forward, yeah, obviously we want to move away from offsetting towards removal, but I'm just wondering how realistic this is for a lot of festivals in terms of in the current economic climate with all the pressures that are on them, particularly if we're thinking about sort of volunteer, community-led festivals, which is a lot of the sector. And I just wondered if you had any evidence of where maybe you're working with the public sector or the local authorities or people putting into place funding to support festivals to do this where it really isn't possible for them to do it at the moment throughout their own budgets.
Yeah. Is that question for Mark or...
Either.
Okay. Do you want to share it between you?
I've not... This is the first event, actually, where I've been able to prioritise it fully, and I think that came from the benefit of being a bespoke company, that there wasn't any baggage about how we do business. So I think I had the luxury in that respect. I think it's challenging in my kind of corporate world that clients often say they want to pay for things, but then when it's shown as a line item in a budget, they can do without it. So I think part of it is kind of working out how you can bake it into your financial model, but so that actually this is how we do business, and that's it. That's not an option. But I'm not personally at the moment working with anyone doing it.
So we are. So we're talking to a number of local authorities at the moment, and actually the thing with carbon budgets and carbon pricing in local authorities, there seems to be a multitude of prices and ideas and who's that. So for instance, the buildings people have an idea of what carbon costs, and the parks people have another one, all that kind of stuff. So for instance, depending on which local authority you go to, if your building doesn't reach certain standards, they will say, well, I'm going to charge you for every tonne of carbon you're below the standard I want, and I'm going to do that for 30 years, because the building has to be there for 30 years. So I'm going to charge you £1,800 per tonne. So we can take that and do interesting things with it. What's not happening at the moment is there isn't often an overall carbon strategy for a local authority. There's somebody who's really excited about in transport, and there's somebody over there. So what we need to do is but the new Department for Net Zero, interestingly, I'm seeing lots of things coming out of that, going to some of our clients saying there are now grants for you to start thinking about this in a holistic way. So you're absolutely right, I think, because of this legally binding target that the nation has, because of this new department, I think we'll start to see some more clarity, and because we'll get more auditing and we'll get more brilliant work from people like Agree in the Future, we'll get more examples from brilliant people like Rosanna going like, okay, we can start to see how this works. One of the ways I think we're going to do this is, and this is something we're talking to Agree in the Future about, is in each industry working out that ecosystem of like whose scope is it anyway, to quote the old comedy company, the old comedy show, which is like, I don't know what I'm responsible for. That's my scope 1, that's my scope 2. My scope 3 seems to be, am I responsible for that because I bought it or because... So you actually had a very sensible way of thinking about this. You said, like, we can't, it's not our responsibility to think about how everybody got to the pageant, but we did invite those celebrities, and actually they definitely wouldn't have got on that flight. So even though that flight was the airline scope 1 and 2, you felt we will take responsibility for that bit. So I think there's this whole conversation we have to have, is like, whose scope is it anyway? And at the moment, people come to you and go like, you've got to be carbon negative or carbon neutral. You go like, what does that mean? Which bit is mine? And so building an ecosystem map for events in the music industry, which is something Agree in the Future are doing with this, is really important. But as you say, it's going to take us a few years to do that. What we can't have is loads of sort of like mealy-mouthed guidelines, from the Arts Council going like, well, you need to do this, and then going like, yeah, but how? They've got to actually get out there and do it, which is why people like Artichoke are brilliant. They're like, well, we're just going to go and do it, and we'll learn by doing best practice, and then we'll give that to other people.
Thank you. The lady in the front, could you pass your mic across? Thank you.
Hello, my name is Maya. I'm with Falmouth Flax. I'm coming from Saudi Arabia. I work in a diplomatic sector. Saudi Arabia is going green, and they want to reach the net zero. Now, they are planning to plant 10 billion trees, and they start already the first billion. So I just want to know, is this initiative achievable? And in your experience, have any country done any initiative approach towards achieving that goal?
So,
Sorry, we're coming from a different kind of region.
so one of the things we have at the moment is we have a whole bunch of petrostates whose entire economy is dependent on selling oil and gas, and we're seeing this with Russia at the moment. So we have this. So from a national security perspective, head on, there's this rather interesting question going on. It's like, if we move over to a low carbon economy too quickly, then you end up with a failed Russia, which is a failed nuclear state. So there's like, okay, well, let's do it more slowly. We can't do it slowly because the planet is, we haven't got time. So then there's talking like, well, how do we then compensate Russia for the carbon it can't sell? Or how do we compensate Saudi Arabia for the carbon it can't sell? And that's not very palatable to people either. There's a great quote from my friend Jonathan Porritt that says, we all sup with the devil, we all just do it with a different length of spoon. And we've got to work out what that length of spoon is. So Saudi Arabia, really, if it wanted to go net zero, should stop pumping out fucking loads of oil. And what it should really do, actually, is it should, so that the International Energy Agency, which is the fossil fuels own industry body, basically said, we can reach net zero, we can give all the energy we need to all the people in the world, but we have to stop exploring new oil and gas. So keep the stuff that's already there, burn the stuff that's already there, compensate for it in various ways by planting trees or whatever, but no new exploration. Any new exploration is a gun held to humanity's head. And Saudi Aramco is doing stacks of new exploration. So is BP. So is all these people. So we, planting 1 billion trees is a nice idea. It's going to take too long. And really, if you took this seriously, if you took your children's future seriously, you would stop exploring new oil and gas. And we have to say that to them, because eventually, if they carry on, they're going to kill us. And fuck that, quite frankly.
One last question.
Sorry, just one thing you did say. So are we seeing any countries doing it? It's moving quite quickly now. So if you look at what happened in Australia, it was the Greens of the Kingmakers. Same in Germany, okay? Actually, in the UK, it's Green councils are winning all over the place. If you look at what Labour's starting to propose, who are almost certainly going to come in, there is some stuff happening.
Just on that, do you agree with what the mayors of London's trying to do with the ULEZ?
Well, the ULEZ is more about air pollution than carbon emissions, and I think it's very controversial because obviously
it is controversial.
You hit some of the lowest paid people who say you can't use your car anymore. How do I get to work? Yeah. But at the same time, he's saying, well, people are dying. I mean, fossil fuel pollution
just on that, just hang on. So, Rosanna, how would you win hearts and minds then with that? Or was that a tricky question to ask or answer?
I mean, I think it's just a tricky time to have implemented it. But I mean, I think these things, where I live, they've just introduced a low traffic neighbourhood zone, and it's the same thing. People are outraged that they can't drive. But I think it just takes time to embed it.
But we don't have time.
We don't have time. So I think as Robert Louis Stevenson said, sooner or later everybody sits down to a feast of consequences. And we've dallied on climate for far too long and air pollution. Air pollution kills 1 in 8 people from fossil fuels. It's the biggest health risk on the planet, okay? And we haven't done anything about it. Why? Because of the vested interests that want to keep the money and governments that are in their pocket. And now we have to do something about it. One of the great things about doing proper removals is it starts to bake into your business model the cost of the damage you do, which means that the people who pollute the most will pay the most, and that might start to rebalance things. That's one of the reasons we're doing all the stuff we're doing, plus the NGO. But what it takes is exemplars of forward-thinking organisations like Rosanna to go, look, can be done. We did it. Because people go, it's too impossible, it's too expensive, we'll never. Don't think so. Managed to do this very iconic, very British, very diverse, great big event, and we removed the carbon. Can be done. No excuses anymore. We all have to get behind this, otherwise there will be no events to go to 30 years from now because we'll all be running to the hills.
I think that's a really good place to kind of pause on.
Nice and cheery, I thought. Nice
there is no excuse, and the responsibility lies with all of us. It's not somebody else's problem. I would like us all to give both Mark and Rosanna this was a fascinating, insightful discussion. I've learned a lot. I didn't realise that forests could be greenwashing or people could be greenwashing forests. Rosanna, sitting on my sofa, I just thought this was amazing. I had no idea of all the little details that went into that. And there was no rehearsal, but it was perfect on the day. So I want you to join me in 2 rounds of applauses for both of our presenters today. And then another applause, and I'll tell you in a moment after we do the first. So join me. And now Rosanna is off to Windsor Castle to receive her honour award. So that deserves... Thank you. I think now it's the next session.
It's tea break.
Is it tea break?
We are going to present our own prestigious award from A Greener Future. Certification of Outstanding for the Platinum Jubilee Pageant, particularly for bringing sustainability into community, as well as all the other things that you did for sustainability during the pageant. So from A Greener Future, well done.
Thank you.
Thank you.